Horror cinema has given us countless iconic villains, but few have achieved the cultural penetration of Ghostface from the Scream franchise. The white mask and black robe have become instantly recognizable symbols of terror, worn by millions as Halloween costumes and referenced endlessly in popular culture. Yet beneath this commercialized image lies a mythology that touches on something far more profound: our relationship with fear itself and the masks we all wear. The Ghostface character emerged in 1996 with Wes Craven's Scream, revitalizing the slasher genre through self-aware commentary and postmodern sensibility. But the power of the image transcends its cinematic origins. The blank white face, the flowing black robe, the distorted voice on the phone, these elements tap into ancient archetypes of faceless terror that have haunted human consciousness for centuries. Throughout history, cultures worldwide have feared faceless entities, from Japanese no-theater masks to medieval plague doctor visages, from tribal ceremonial disguises to executioners' hoods. The concealed face represents something fundamentally disturbing. It removes individuality, erases humanity, and creates a blank canvas onto which we project our deepest anxieties. The genius of Ghostface lies in this psychological sophistication. Unlike monsters with fixed identities, Ghostface can be anyone. The mask doesn't reveal, it conceals, creating a terrifying ambiguity. When facing Ghostface, victims confront not a known entity but infinite possibility. The killer could be a stranger, a friend, a family member, anyone harboring secret rage behind everyday normalcy. Ancient folklore contains countless tales of blank-faced entities that bring doom. In European tradition, the White Lady or Faceless Woman appears before tragedy. Asian cultures describe spirits without features that herald death. These aren't coincidences. They represent universal human fears about identity, recognition, and the unknown. The blank face forces confrontation with existential terror. Human brains are wired to recognize faces. It's one of our most fundamental cognitive functions. When presented with a face lacking expression, lacking features, lacking the subtle cues we use to assess intention and emotion, our minds enter crisis. We cannot read, cannot predict, cannot connect. This cognitive dissonance generates profound unease. Ghostface weaponizes this ancient fear. The mask's simplified features, black eyes, gaping mouth frozen in a scream, create a parody of human expression. It's familiar enough to register as a face, but alien enough to trigger deep discomfort. This uncanny valley effect, where something appears almost but not quite human, has been understood across cultures for millennia. Medieval texts describe rituals involving white masks used to invoke supernatural forces. These weren't entertainments, they were believed to be portals, ways to channel entities from other realms. The mask wearer supposedly surrendered their identity, becoming a vessel for something else. Whether literal or psychological, these beliefs recognized that masks fundamentally alter both wearer and observer. Modern psychology confirms what ancient peoples understood intuitively. Masks change behavior. Studies show people act differently when their faces are concealed more boldly, more aggressively, with diminished inhibition. Anonymity reduces accountability, allowing individuals to commit acts they'd never perform when identifiable. This phenomenon, called de-individuation, explains why masks appear throughout history in contexts ranging from warfare to execution to riot. The concealed face liberates people from social constraints, from the judgment reflected in others' eyes, from their own self-image. Behind a mask, anyone can become someone or something else entirely. Ghostface exploits this transformation. The mask doesn't just hide identity, it creates a new one. The person underneath stops being themselves and becomes the archetype, the killer, the predator, the embodiment of threat. Multiple people have worn the Ghostface mask across the Scream franchise, Yet they all become eerily similar once disguised. The mask imposes its identity upon the wearer. This creates a terrifying reality. Ghostface is simultaneously no one and everyone. It's not a single killer, but a role anyone can inhabit. The mask is democratic in the most frightening way. It doesn't require special powers, supernatural abilities, or even particular skill. Just willingness to surrender oneself to what the mask represents, Clay. One of Ghostface's most distinctive features is the use of phone calls to terrorize victims before attacking. This isn't random, it's psychologically sophisticated. The calls serve multiple purposes. They isolate victims, erode their sense of safety, and most importantly, they transform fear into a weapon more effective than any knife. The voice on the phone operates in a psychological space more intimate than physical presence. It bypasses visual defenses and speaks directly into the victim's ear, into their mind. The questions asked, "What's your favorite scary movie? Do you like scary movies?" seem playful but carry darker meaning. They force victims to acknowledge their own relationship with fear, to recognize they've been consuming terror as entertainment. This meta-commentary reaches beyond the films themselves. We, the audience, also consume fear as entertainment. We pay money to be frightened, seek out horror films, enjoy the adrenaline rush of controlled terror. Ghostface holds up a mirror to this phenomenon, asking what it means that we find pleasure in simulated violence and fear. The phone calls also exploit modern isolation. Despite technology connecting us constantly, we've never been more alone. A voice on the phone represents this paradox: intimate yet distant, personal yet disconnected. Ghostface weaponizes our contemporary experience of isolation within connectivity, turning our devices against us. The Scream franchise centers on the fictional town of Woodsboro, California, where the original murders occurred. But Woodsboro represents more than just a setting. It's a symbol of how trauma embeds itself in communities, how violence echoes across generations, how places can become haunted not by ghosts but by memory and fear. In the films, Woodsboro experiences repeated cycles of Ghostface killings, different perpetrators, different motives, yet the pattern repeats. This reflects a psychological truth: trauma begets trauma. Communities that experience extreme violence often see it return in various forms. The original wound never fully heals. It festers, creating conditions for new outbreaks. The franchise's protagonists, particularly Sidney Prescott, embody the struggle to break this cycle. Sidney survives repeated encounters with Ghostface, continually forced to confront new killers wearing the same mask. Her journey represents the challenge of living with trauma, of recognizing that survival doesn't mean the threat has ended, that vigilance becomes a permanent state. This resonates because it mirrors reality. Survivors of violence often describe feeling perpetually unsafe, constantly scanning for threats, unable to fully relax. Sidney's recurring nightmare that Ghostface always returns reflects PTSD's intrusive nature. The way trauma hijacks the present with echoes of the past. One of Scream's most effective innovations was making the killer's identity a mystery, then revealing them as ordinary people from the victim's community. Billy Loomis and Stu Macar, the original killers, weren't supernatural entities or obvious monsters. They were boyfriends, classmates, neighbors, people integrated into daily life who harbored secret rage. This choice elevated the horror beyond jump scares. It suggested that danger doesn't announce itself obviously, that the greatest threats often come from those closest to us, that anyone might be capable of extreme violence under certain circumstances. The mask becomes a metaphor for the faces we all wear in public, concealing our true thoughts and feelings. Each Scream film reveals new killers with different motives: revenge, fame, obsession, continuation of family legacy. Yet they all choose the Ghostface persona. The mask provides a template, a role to inhabit, a way to transform personal grievance into archetypal terror. It offers what psychological literature calls moral disengagement, a way to distance oneself from the consequences of one's actions. The killers believe they control the mask, that they are using it for their purposes. But the films suggest otherwise. Once donned, the mask seems to control them, dictating behavior, transforming rational people into relentless stalkers. This reflects the psychological reality that violence has its own momentum once begun. It becomes difficult to stop. Across the Scream franchise, certain elements remain constant despite changing killers. The phone calls, the questions, the prolonged stalking, the theatrical presentation of violence, these features transcend individual motivation. They suggest something deeper than personal pathology, a pattern that exists independent of the person wearing the mask. This raises disturbing questions. Does the role shape the person, or does the person shape the role? When someone puts on the Ghostface mask, are they expressing their own violence, or are they channeling something larger? The films deliberately leave this ambiguous, creating space for multiple interpretations. From one perspective, Ghostface represents the ultimate expression of learned behavior. The killers have all consumed horror films, studied famous murders, internalized patterns of violence from media. They're performing scripts absorbed from culture, acting out scenarios they've seen countless times. The mask becomes the costume for this deadly performance. From another angle, Ghostface embodies something more primal, the human capacity for violence that exists beneath civilization's thin veneer. The mask doesn't create this capacity. It merely liberates it, giving permission to act on impulses normally suppressed. In this reading, anyone could become Ghostface given the right circumstances, the right pressures, the right moment of moral collapse. The Scream films explore how fear spreads through communities like contagion. Once Ghostface appears, paranoia infects everyone. Neighbors suspect each other, friends become potential threats, every phone call carries menace. This social disintegration represents fear's most insidious powerites, ability to destroy trust and fracture communities from within. This pattern mirrors historical examples of collective panic witch trials, red scares, moral panics of various kinds. When fear takes hold, rational thinking erodes. People begin seeing threats everywhere, interpreting ambiguous situations as dangerous, attacking those they previously trusted. Ghostface weaponizes this tendency, using fear to turn communities against themselves. The films also examine how media amplifies fear. News coverage, true crime books, and eventually movies about the Woodsboro murders spread the story far beyond its original context. This publicity transforms local tragedy into national mythology, inspiring copycat crimes and embedding Ghostface in cultural consciousness. The mask becomes iconic, recognized worldwide, its image infinitely reproducible. This meta-commentary critiques our cultural relationship with violence. We're simultaneously horrified by real murders and fascinated by fictional ones. We condemn actual killers while making celebrities of actors who play them. Ghostface exists at the intersection of these contradictions, asking uncomfortable questions about what we consume and why. A recurring theme throughout the Scream franchise is the impossibility of achieving complete safety. Sydney repeatedly tries to escape her past, moving away, changing her life, attempting to leave Ghostface behind. Yet the mask always finds her. New killers emerge, wearing the same disguise, forcing her back into the nightmare. This reflects a profound truth about trauma and fear. You can't simply leave them behind. They follow, embedded in memory, inscribed on psyche, ready to resurface when triggered. Sydney's journey illustrates the challenge of living with this reality, not the fantasy of complete healing, but the struggle of managing ongoing vulnerability. The films also explore how the desire for safety can become its own trap. Characters who isolate themselves, who avoid connection out of fear, often become easier targets. Those who remain engaged with community, despite the risks, demonstrate greater resilience. This suggests that while perfect safety is impossible, meaning and connection make life worth living despite danger. Ghostface endures as a cultural icon because the mask reflects society's anxieties back at us. In the 1990s, when Scream debuted, it captured psychological unease about violence, media saturation, and the breakdown of traditional communities. The film's self-aware tone matched a cultural moment when irony and meta-commentary became dominant modes. Subsequent films have adapted to new contexts. As technology evolved, Ghostface's methods incorporated cell phones, internet, social media. The mask remains constant, but the world around it changes, demonstrating how core fears persist even as their expressions evolve. We may use different devices, inhabit different social structures, but fundamental anxieties about violence, identity, and trust remain. The franchise also interrogates fame culture and the disturbing reality that some people seek notoriety through violence. Several Ghostface killers are motivated by desire for recognition, to become part of the mythology, to achieve immortality through infamy. This reflects real patterns where mass violence becomes a pathway to fame for people who feel powerless and invisible. Combined on its deepest level, Ghostface represents the masks we all wear, the personas we present to hide our true selves, the performances we give to navigate social life, the aspects of our nature we conceal from others, and sometimes ourselves. The literal mask becomes a metaphor for psychological masks we employ constantly. Everyone maintains separation between public face and private thoughts. We all harbor feelings we'd never express, impulses we'd never act on, aspects of ourselves we hide from judgment. Ghostface literalizes this universal experience, suggesting that behind every normal face could lurk something frightening, that we never fully know anyone, that identity itself is performance. This existential dimension elevates Ghostface beyond simple slasher villain. The mask asks, who are we really? How much of our identity is authentic, and how much is constructed for others? What would we become if freed from social constraint and accountability? These aren't comfortable questions, which is precisely why they're effective. One of the most psychologically sophisticated aspects of the Scream franchise is its exploration of cyclical trauma. Ghostface doesn't appear once and vanish. The mask returns repeatedly, worn by new killers with new grievances. This structure mirrors how trauma operates, not as a single event but as a pattern that repeats, echoing across time. Survivors like Sydney must face this reality that survival doesn't mean safety, that the threat can always return in new forms. This reflects genuine experiences of people living with PTSD or in communities marked by ongoing violence. The vigilance never ends. The fear remains dormant but never fully disappears. Yet, the films also suggest resilience is possible. Sydney survives, adapts, learns to function despite ongoing threat. She doesn't overcome her trauma in the sense of erasing it, but she develops strategies for living with it. This represents a more realistic model of recovery than the fantasy of complete healing, acknowledging that some experiences change us permanently while insisting we can still build meaningful lives. Ghostface has remained culturally relevant for nearly 3 decades because the mask touches something fundamental about human psychology and social existence. It represents our fears about identity, violence, and the thin boundary between ordinary life and sudden horror. The blank face reflects our anxiety about not knowing who to trust, while the accessibility of the disguise anyone can wear it suggests that danger can come from anywhere. The franchise's self-awareness allows it to evolve with culture while maintaining core themes. By acknowledging its status as both fiction and commentary on fiction, Scream creates a hall of mirrors where reality and representation blur. We watch characters who've watched horror films, who know the rules, yet still fall victim. This suggests that knowledge doesn't equal immunity, that understanding danger doesn't necessarily protect us. Beyond entertainment, Ghostface serves as a cultural warning about several disturbing realities. First, that violence often comes from within communities rather than from obvious outsiders. The greatest threats typically aren't strangers in dark alleys, but people we know who move among us undetected until they act. Second, that our media-saturated culture creates scripts for violence that troubled individuals can follow. The copycat phenomenon is real. High-profile crimes inspire imitations. By making this dynamic explicit, Scream forces us to confront our complicity in creating and consuming violent narratives. Third, that trauma compounds across generations. The Scream films show how one outbreak of violence creates conditions for future violence through damaged survivors, who hurt others, through family legacies of pain, through communities that never fully heal. Breaking these cycles requires conscious effort and often proves impossible. Ghostface endures because the mask represents something true about human nature and social existence. We all wear masks of various kinds, concealing aspects of ourselves from others and sometimes ourselves. We all harbor capacities we prefer not to acknowledge for violence, for cruelty, for betrayal. We all live with the knowledge that safety is illusion, that those closest to us could hurt us most deeply. The blank white face doesn't show us a monster, it shows us a mirror. Behind the mask could be anyone, which means behind our own masks, we could become anything. This uncomfortable recognition gives Ghostface its enduring power. The horror isn't external but internal, not about some supernatural entity but about human potential for darkness. Gabe. Every time someone dons the Ghostface costume for Halloween, every time the image appears in media, every time we reference the character in conversation, we acknowledge and perpetuate this mythology. The mask has become a symbol that transcends its origins, representing our collective anxieties about identity, violence, and the fragility of civilization's restraints. In the end, Ghostface teaches us that the monsters aren't supernatural beings, but ordinary people who make devastating choices. That terror doesn't announce itself obviously, but hides behind familiar faces. That fear itself can be weaponized, spreading through communities and destroying from within. And perhaps most disturbing, that given the right circumstances, the right pressures, the right moment of moral collapse, anyone might pick up the mask and become the monster they feared. The phone might ring at any moment. The voice on the other end might ask about scary movies, about fear, about the thin line between entertainment and reality. And in that moment, we're forced to confront the truth Ghostface represents, that horror isn't something we watch safely from a distance, but something embedded in the human condition, waiting behind every mask we wear.